Welcome. I am so glad you're joining us today. In this explainer, we're going to take a deep dive into the untold, gritty, social realities behind one of the most legendary conflicts in human history. We've all heard the epic myths and the grand poetry, right? But today, we are stripping away that myth to look at the cold, hard reality on the ground. We're going to uncover the hidden truths of power, class, and absolute survival. Let's jump right in. Okay, let's kick things off with a question that completely challenges what we think we know. When I say Trojan War, who immediately pops into your head? You're probably picturing the classic romanticized figures, the handsome Prince Paris, the beautiful Helen, or maybe the seemingly invincible Achilles. For literally thousands of years, those are the names that have echoed through history. But what if I told you our entire idea of heroism in this story is totally skewed? Today, based on a really fascinating source text, we're going to flip those expectations upside down and look right past the shiny armor. To get what actually went down, we have to trace how this timeline unfolded. Year 1 starts with Paris taking Helen. Officially, King Menelaus launches this massive invasion just to avenge his wounded pride. But our source makes a crucial point here. The real, hidden motive had nothing to do with romance. It was a totally calculated move to grab control of Troy, dominate its incredibly lucrative trade routes, and exploit its geography. Jump ahead to year 5, and it's not some glorious battlefield of champions. It is a grueling, punishing stalemate and a brutal economic blockade. And by year 10, total, suffocating siege. This wasn't just a war, it was a decade-long strangulation of a city. Section 1. The elite reality, luxury in the midst of war. Now that we understand the strategic reality of this 10-year blockade, we need to look at how the guys in charge actually lived. Our text points out this stark, honestly kind of uncomfortable similarity between the two bitter enemies. Even though they were locked in total war, the Trojan elites, like King Priam, and the Greek elites, like Achilles, never went hungry. They never went thirsty. They completely bypassed the daily deprivations of the blockade. Both sets of elites lived in these massive tents, totally insulated in a bubble of luxury and comfort. Whatever tiny amount of resources existed went straight to them because they were the ruling class. The regimes on both sides, yeah, they were perfectly fine. Section 2, the true losers, the invisible commoners. Let's shift our focus completely away from those famous kings for a second and look at the people actually carrying the crushing weight of this siege. The class divide was absolutely massive. While the high-ranking leaders were chilling in luxury tents with plenty of food, the commoners and low-ranking soldiers were quite literally sleeping in the dirt, fully exposed to the elements, and facing actual starvation. The really striking takeaway here is that a poor Trojan merchant stuck inside the walls and a low-ranking Greek soldier camped outside had the exact same miserable reality. They had way more in common with each other than with the kings telling them what to do. But you never really read about those starving soldiers or merchants in the ancient epics, do you? The source makes a really profound observation about how history is recorded. We all know history is written by the victors, but it goes a step further. Victors intentionally glorify the elites they just defeated. Why? Well, because hyping up the status of your conquered enemy makes your own victory look infinitely more impressive. The poets and chroniclers focus entirely on the grand adventures of the opposing regimes, completely and deliberately erasing the suffering masses from the historical record. So, the crucial point is this. We need to actively rethink what heroism actually means. Our source asks such an incredibly powerful question. Is an elite warrior like Achilles truly more of a hero than an ordinary Trojan father? Think about a guy who day in and day out for 10 agonizing years of a blockade performs absolute administrative magic just to find enough food to keep his wife, his kids, and maybe his neighbors alive. That everyday desperate survival is totally ignored by the history books. Yet arguably, that takes vastly more resilience and character than wielding a spear when you know exactly where your next meal is coming from. To really drive this moral argument home, the author brings in a very famous biblical quote. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's a striking way to reframe the narrative around wealth, power, and who truly deserves historical reverence. The elites of Troy and Greece absolutely secured their names in the epic poems, but the text uses this quote to suggest that moral victory, the truly righteous struggle, belonged entirely to the impoverished masses who endured the suffering created by those rich men. Now, I want you to hold on to that thought. Ancient blockades, insulated elites, suffering commoners. Doesn't this decades-long situation, where the ruling class is fine while regular people suffer, remind you of something today? The author uses this exact rhetorical question to execute a massive narrative pivot. We're stepping right off the ancient shores of Troy and dropping squarely into modern geopolitics. Section 3. A modern parallel, the Caribbean blockade. So here we're examining the core of the author's argument, showing how the story of Troy acts as an allegorical mirror for the world right now. The source outlines a very specific modern analogy, neutrally breaking down a tense situation involving a Caribbean island and its powerful neighbor. We are looking at a blockade maintained not just for 10 years, but for decades. And, just like in the ancient myth, the text points out that the regimes on both sides spend all their time constantly shifting the blame. Furthermore, the source critiques the political rhetoric, noting that the powerful regime keeps the blockade going while entirely ignoring or just refusing to acknowledge the tangible suffering of the actual populations involved. And this is where the parallel gets razor sharp. The author argues that geopolitical discourse today perfectly mirrors those ancient epics. Politicians and commentators constantly invoke the word regime. They use the faults of the smaller regime to justify these crushing blockades. But just like Homer's hyper-focus on King Priam and King Menelaus, this obsession with elite political structures completely masks the true human cost. The rhetoric serves the powerful, keeping the spotlight glued to the leaders, while the everyday, forgotten populations are left to struggle in the shadows, totally unmentioned in the grand speeches. Section 4. The cost of blockades. A universal truth. Pulling all these narrative threads together from the Bronze Age straight through to the modern-day Caribbean, we arrive at the overarching thesis of our source material. The author's main argument is that no matter the historical era, no matter the technology, and regardless of which global powers are involved, the fundamental dynamic never changes. In every war, in every embargo, no matter what political labels get slapped onto it, it is invariably those at the bottom who carry the ultimate crushing burden. The elites will always have their insulated tents and their food. The commoners will always face the elements and the scarcity. Which leaves us with one final, profound thought to consider. We know exactly how Homer recorded the Trojan War, but when this modern, decades-long epic finally passes into history, how is it going to be written? Will future history books only talk about the presidents, the premiers, and the regimes, or will they finally record the true heroes, the everyday people, the fathers, the mothers, who simply tried to survive the blockades built by the powerful? It's a powerful question to reflect on as we watch conflicts unfold in our world today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning the narrative and keep seeking the full picture.